Welcome to the Alpha Human Podcast. I'm Lawrence Rosenberg, your host, and today's guest is Dean Stott, ex-British Special Forces and one of the first soldiers from the British Army to cross over and pass the grueling selection process for the Special Boat Service, SBS. And for our audience on this side of the pond, the SBS is similar to our U.S. Navy SEALs, which makes Dean's achievement here pretty extraordinary, given British Army candidates for Special Forces typically pursue selection with the SAS, Special Air Service, which is similar to our Green Berets and Delta Force. Then, after 16 years of military service, Dean transitioned into private security, where his expertise led him to take on close protection work and training security teams, mainly for foreign government officials. Most of these assignments saw Dean navigating high-stakes conflicts involving extortion, kidnapping, civil war, piracy, military coups in global hotspots from Kurdistan to Somalia, Yemen to Guinea. He eventually became particularly well known for his exceptional ability to execute high-risk evacuations. Notably, in 2014, Dean orchestrated the evacuation of the Canadian embassy in Libya during a period of extreme unrest. And more recently, in 2021, he played a pivotal role in aiding the evacuation of over 1,000 people from Afghanistan during the Taliban takeover. And he provided critical support in bringing civilians to safety in Israel following the October 7th attacks. In 2016, Dean took on what would become one of the greatest challenges of his life, cycling the entire 14,000-mile Pan-American highway from Argentina to Alaska. And despite having no background in cycling, Dean's relentless determination carried him through this record-breaking journey, during which he traversed 14 countries, weathered extreme temperatures from blistering heat to freezing cold while crossing extreme terrains from the deserts of Chile to the mountains of Alaska, culminating in his shattering of the previous world record by 17 days to become the first person to ever finish the route in under 100 days, all while working to raise £1 million British for charity. Dean has also been awarded the distinguished honor of becoming a member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, an MBE, for his services to sport, humanitarian work, and mental health awareness. He is also author of the book, Relentless, From Special Operations to World Record Holder, which dives into his life in the military, his time in Special Forces, and his record-breaking Pan-American highway ride. Dean also stars in the Netflix reality series Toughest Forces on Earth, which follows him alongside two other elite special operators, a U.S. Army Ranger and a U.S. Navy SEAL, as they train with and immerse themselves in some of the world's most elite military units. Now, that is one heck of a bio. Dean, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. That's an impressive introduction, probably one of the best ones I've had. I actually need to take that from you when people ask me, what do I do for a living? Hand over the sheet.
There we go. There we go.
Hard to summarize, yeah, multifaceted.
Awesome. Awesome. So, Dean, I've read your book, Relentless. Man, I'll tell you what an exciting ride. It's incredibly compelling, largely because you just never seem to stop. I mean, you're absolutely ceaseless. It's literally one challenge after another with you. And I think if there's anyone who truly embodies the ideal of being unrelenting, it's you. And so throughout the book, I found myself searching for the mindset that drives you, the determination and the unyielding nature that defines who you are. So a lot of my questions are going to delve into your story, but specifically through the lens of your mindset and your perspective. I think this is an incredibly valuable as a case study for helping others overcome obstacles in their own lives and perhaps maybe to redirect their journeys toward challenges that are both exciting and inspiring. How does that sound?
Sounds perfect. Yeah, I'd love to know what's going on in my mind as well.
Let's see if we can dig it out. All right. So with that said, let's jump into your story from the point where you decide that you're going to join the Army, because it really didn't seem like you were anywhere close to being on track to join the military, let alone Special Forces. But then after an argument with your dad, the whole trajectory of your life seemed to change. Can you give us the mindset that led to such a life-changing decision?
Yeah, so it was my father was in the military, so that was a key part of that argument with my father. He was he was a military guy himself. We grew up in a town called Aldershot, which was home of the British Army. So it's probably equivalent to growing up in Fort Bragg.
Ah,
You literally have military everywhere. It's the home of the airborne units. So I'd never even heard of the Royal Marines or the Special Boat Service because they would never have a recruitment place in this town. It's very army heavy. So very much immersed in that environment, but never wanted to continue that family tradition. It was never forced upon me either. Always wanted to be a fireman. But my father, he was a sergeant major. He's quite, I'd say he's strict. He's a Scottish guy. He wanted me to have more of an education that different from what he had. So very strict. I went to school, did my school, got good grades, and then I went to college, and that's where it sort of changed for me. Is that college, um, you didn't have rather than going to school and it's a full day ahead of you. College, there was lessons here, then you had a half day off, and it was very
right.
intermittent. And I was getting bored, and we had a vacation period, 2 weeks, and me and my friends went down to Newquay. So Newquay, for your listeners, is the southwest of UK. It's part of the World Surf Tour. It's a big surfing spot, and I've been surfing since a young boy, and I ended up going down there surfing.
Nice.
Was supposed to be for 2 weeks and ended up being 6 months. Back in 1994, long before the mobile phone. So my father came looking for me, found me working in the surf shop. And because of the time period I'd missed from college, I'd sort of wasted, as he said, I'd wasted my education and what was I going to do with my life? And so,
Mm,
as I mentioned before, I always wanted to be a fireman. You couldn't be a fireman until you're the age of 18. And then
okay.
back in 93, 94, there was a huge recession in UK. So my local city or local town, there was 2,000 applicants for the one fireman job. And so it was very intense. And so for me, I still had that vision of being a fireman. I thought, well, if I join the military for
Mhm.
3 years, it gives me great discipline, gives me fitness, helps my resume. And then I can join the fire brigade. And so that's what I told my father. I said, I'll join the military. And I was expecting more warm, comforting words and advice from him, and he told me I'd last 2 minutes. And so,
Nice.
mindset, the original question, what was my mindset around that was, you know, even nowadays, if you can disagree with someone, you can argue till you're blue in the face. You're not going to change their mind. The only way you can change their mind is through action. So the best course of action was action itself. And so there's no point in me and my father arguing in the car for the 4 hour journey back. I told him what I was going to do. He gave me his response. But on the Monday morning, I did. I walked into the careers office and I started my process. And that's when my father then changed. He then realized actually he is being serious and then offered me support and advice from that point on.
Nice. Nice. So, all right. So you join the army. You go through basic training where you quickly excelled, not just in meeting the physical challenges, but also in the team dynamic. You seem to thrive on helping others push through.
Mm.
And after qualifying for your position during phase two training, you continue to earn respect for your dedication and your abilities. Yet, as you kind of settled into your role within the regiment, you begin to feel like this creeping sense of restlessness because you said that you're finding yourself on a trajectory toward what you describe as the tracksuit soldier lifestyle.
Mm.
What was driving that hunger for maybe something more?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I joined the military, you guys work in pounds. So I was probably about 135 to 140 pounds, and
Whoa.
I was about 5'7" in height. I was 17 at the time when I joined the army, and so I wasn't the physical picture that you see in front of you now.
Okay.
When I joined the military, I didn't have any aspirations of special forces. I didn't really look at my career. I just wanted to get through the next course. So I went through basic training. And then I was in the top, I'd say I was in the top 25% of that group.
Okay.
And then in a short period of time, so from the age of 17 to about 19, I shot up to 200 pounds. I was 5'11", so physically I was growing, but mentally I was getting stronger as well.
Okay.
So each time I went on a course, I was getting fitter. And I then realized actually I wasn't in the top 25%. I was in the top 5%. And I always made sure that I stayed there. And so it wasn't a mindset I had when I went in. It was something it was growth that I picked up through
Mm,
training, the physical and the mental robustness. And as you touched on, my early career, my father went, which we touched on, I was in the military. He was. I always describe him as the Ted Lasso of the British Army. So he was the army soccer manager, player, and coach. And
Okay.
so his career was very much all I saw him was in tracksuits. He would play soccer, he would train the army team, he'd be part of that team as well. I didn't know much about the rest of the military, the various elite units, I mean the special forces units. I didn't understand the infrastructure.
Hmm.
So my surname Stott is quite a rare name in UK. So as soon as I was going through training, people recognized the surname and then they're like, "Oh, you're Dave Stott's son," and they're like, "You're playing soccer,"
Ah,
because yeah. So already, just because of the relationship with my father, my first posting was to Germany. So the first time I ever got on a plane at the age of 18 was to go to my new unit in Germany, and we played soccer. That is all we did. I ended up working in the gym as a PTI. And it was good for a young 18-year-old. You know, we'd turn up 8 o'clock in the morning and we'd play soccer till noon. We'd have our own physios, we'd have our own masseuses. It was almost like a semi-professional team.
wow.
I didn't soon then realize actually I'm just following in my father's path. You know, I'm not I'm not steering my own path. And I saw guys, and I knew I had the physical robustness. I was actually bigger than my dad now as well. My dad still, he was about 5'9" and
Okay.
still probably weighed about 160, 170 pounds. So our physical attributes were very different. And so I said, no, I can play soccer, which is fine, but I know I'm not going to go professional. So, you know, I then volunteered to go on the All Arms Commander course, which was a tier 2 special forces.
And well, that's interesting because I think so some of the things we start seeing, because
Mm,
again, you go from living the surfer lifestyle, and all of a sudden, all of this starts developing in you.
yeah.
The need for challenge, and then there's this competitiveness about you that you start to see in the book. You seem to you want to compete for everything. So
Yeah.
throughout your journey, there's this recurring theme of relentless competition, whether it was earning the radio at Colchester for having the most squared away living quarters, or
Yeah.
leading the fitness tests, or cementing your reputation during the Army boxing finals where you knocked out your opponent 3 times in 90 seconds. Where did, challenges aside, mountains to climb aside, where did the drive to compete start coming from?
I think the you know when I you know we talk about when you join the military, is it nature or nurture? You know, I think my time in the military was nurtured, but nature-wise, what I took into the military was that competitive streak. Because my
Okay.
father was the soccer manager, player, and coach. You know, his career was based around winning, but
Mm.
he would bring that home as well. You know, even on Christmas Day, we'd get a couple of board games at Christmas for the family, and it was almost like the annual board game event. You had to win that, to keep the title. So
Okay.
everything, so that was naturally disseminated down from my father. Everything we did, even he was running up the stairs, I'll try and beat him. And the good thing is he wouldn't let me win unless I actually won. And I do that now with my kids. I know people are like, "Oh yeah, let them win, let them." I was like, "No, they haven't earned it." When they then win, they know that they've won, on their own merit. And so that nature-wise, that was already in me when I joined the military, that competitive streak. The confidence then came as I started growing
Mm.
physically, mentally. That's when I was like, right, no, yeah, like I said, I was in the top 25, I was then in the top five, and then you then start going up to the top 1% in the military, to the top 0.01%,
Mm.
and start getting better and better. And you then believe in yourself, and then you think, well, what's next? What is the next thing that I can do? And I think, yeah, I just wasn't comfortable in passing. It was passing with merit.
So eventually, as you mentioned, so you make it into Commando 59,
Yes.
an elite unit within the Royal Engineers that operated alongside the Royal Marines.
Yeah.
And it's known, if I'm correct, for its physically demanding standards and high level of professionalism. Commando 59 appeared to be everything you'd been looking for at the time. I mean, it's physically challenging, filled with men who kind of shared your competitive drive. And then you ended up getting selected for Recce Troop,
Yes. Yeah.
right? So, um, first off, before I ask this next, what is Recce Troop?
So Wreckage Troop is reconnaissance troop. So you have your unit 5-9 commando, and then within the brigade, free commander brigade, it's called. You have the Royal Marines, 2-9 commando artillery, 5-9 commando engineers. It's a whole brigade. But there's a specialist unit within that called Brigade Reconnaissance Force, which has the key players from 5-9, from 2-9, and from the Marines. And what it is these guys will parachute in ahead of the rest of the units and be forward observers, whether that's naval gunfire from the artillery, whether it's snipers and mountain leaders from the Royal Marines, or engineer reconnaissance from ourselves. And so yeah, I was then selected to join that elite group, which was good. But I think where the competitiveness comes from is the Royal Marines Commando course is 9 months long. It's the longest basic training in the world. And it's the only the coveted green beret you get at the end. I mentioned the word coveted is the only beret that you have to earn. You don't just get it. So there's other units like the airborne units, the parachute regiment, which has the maroon beret. If you're attached to that brigade, whether you've done their course or not, they will give you the beret anyway.
Okay.
Even the SAS, if you're attached to the SAS, they'll give you the Sandy beret.
Ah,
Where Green Beret is something they're very proud of. You have to earn it. You're not getting it for free. And so coming in as an army guy, you're already wanting to prove yourselves against these Marines. It's like, yeah, I deserve this Green Beret, and even more. So we ended up getting ourselves in a physical condition to be even better than them as well.
wow.
Because you're almost, I think for me, my career, I almost was an ambassador, whether it's for my cat badge, for my unit, or for myself, that I wanted, to excel. I wanted to let them know, or those people know, or those units know that I had a seat at the table.
So while you're in Recce Troop, you mentioned that you also mentioned that it was a great stepping stone toward special forces selection in the future.
Yeah.
And you said it was an idea that you started to begin toying with as you considered your future path in the Army. What was it about special forces that appealed to you? Because as you mentioned, initially when you first came into the Army, you weren't aware of all these different elite units. You didn't, maybe weren't really focusing or cognizant of the SAS or the SBS and all these different possibilities for you. But now that you had a taste, all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, you start sniffing around special forces like it's something you might want to do. So what is it about that that's
Yeah.
speaking to you?
So probably for your listeners, just to really get an idea of the differences in UK and US. So your
Okay.
special forces here, you have 65,000 people in SOCOM, Special Operations
That's right.
Command, which is Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, Airborne, all these guys. Um, we in the UK, the commandos, the parachute regiment, we call them elite forces, but
Okay.
they're tier two. They're already tier two special forces. So I was already in the special forces, but in tier two.
Gotcha.
Um, but we don't call them special forces. In the UK, special forces is the SAS and SBS, which is tier one. And I think between the units, there's only 500 guys in total.
Wow.
And here in the US, your tier one unit is SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force. And
That's
so
right.
so already I was in the special forces. I was just in tier two special forces in the commandos. So
Gotcha.
so the commandos and paras are equivalent to Green Berets, Rangers, and everything else. So I was already in that environment anyway.
Okay.
But then because you're at the top, you're in the reconnaissance within that group. A lot of the guys were going to tier one special forces, and so I was seeing guys come and go. Some guys would fail, some guys would pass, and I knew, and you would self-analyze yourself against them. You're like, well, actually, they can do it, I can do it. And literally my career path had gone from out here to there was only one direction really, and that was tier one special forces. And my reason for the SBS was British Army, you would go to the Special Air Service, and Royal Marines would go to the Special Boat Service.
Okay.
But the SBS were losing candidates. So a Royal Marine can go to SAS if they don't like diving. And so they were losing this whole opportunity of
Wow.
recruitment. And so they then decided to open it up, try service as well. And that was at the time that I was looking to join. And so for me, I'd spent 8 years now in brigade reconnaissance with the Free Commander Brigade. I was an instructor on the commando course with the Royal Marines. My career
Right.
was always with the Marines and the Green Berets. But unlike here in the US, where Delta Force have their own selection and SEAL Team 6 have theirs,
Right.
the SAS and SBS is the same. It's no different. So,
Wow.
so it wasn't like one was easier than the other. It's exactly the same, anyways. Yeah. So much to the disgust of my friends in the SAS, I volunteered for the SBS. And I think the concern there wasn't so much that I was doing it, is what, the ripple effect, that, other guys would be going, because 5'9" Commando Recce Troop, we had 100% pass rate on selection. And so if
Wow.
other guys were going to go, and I think now, the 200 started on selection and we had 8 pass. That's the natural attrition rate, is about 95%. But I think now, and we only have 2 selections a year, but I think now something like 15% of the special boat service comes from the Army or other units.
Very interesting. Very
Mm.
interesting. Um, Back to, I wanted to talk about your time as an instructor on the commando course, the All Arms Commando course, where you were. This is before, I believe, this is before you go for selection
Yeah.
into SBS. You were training future commandos to earn their Green Berets and Commando daggers. So during this time, you reflected that the most valuable lesson you learned was about the kind of instructor you wanted to be.
Yeah.
Because you said you noticed that many NCOs relied on shouting and swearing, perhaps believing that it made them feared.
Mm.
But you chose a very different approach.
Yeah.
How did your philosophy as an instructor differ from the stereotypical drill sergeant archetype we often see in movies like Full Metal Jacket, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Wait,
I laugh at Full Metal Jacket because that was the movie I watched with my friends before I joined the army, the night before I joined the army.
oh, perfect.
And strangely enough, where they filmed Full Metal Jacket was in Basingbourne, where I did my basic training in the UK. So it was actually filmed where in the UK. I think Memphis Belle was filmed there as well.
Very
But
interesting.
but it's interesting, yeah. What it is I when I did my commando course at 18, I didn't, I didn't learn much about being a commando, about new tactics, the tactics of the Royal Marines, or for us, it was the instructors weren't that good. They were literally screaming, shouting. It was basically who was the fittest and who can withstand being cold all the time. We had Gore-Tex for when it rains, but they wouldn't let us use it. And so really it was just a 10-week survival course getting through. There was a lot of officers on our course, actually. So we had naval officers, a lot of naval officers on the course. It was very officer heavy. And there was a lot of I was even seeing the instructors, because on the All Arms Commander course, unlike the Royal Marines course where they come in as civilians and they're Marines, the All Arms Commander course, you've got people for all over the army at different times in their careers. Some will be uh, like myself, starting off in their career, but then you would have corporals, you'd have sergeants, you'd have senior NCOs, you then also have officers. So you had the whole broad spectrum.
Wow.
But there was also clashes of personalities with the instructors with some of these guys. And, we were seeing arguments and fights. And it's like, so when it came to the end of the course, I passed the course, I got my Green Beret, but the officers, you do a course critique, what was good, what was that, what can we, the officers went to town on this training team. They went to town and everyone on that training team got sacked because of
Wow.
what they heard, because they just saw it as an excuse to shout and scream and shout at this. So then fast forward 3.5 years, when I go back as an instructor, things have changed completely. And so, but there was still a couple of instructors on ours and they were screaming and shouting. And I'm like, well, why are you doing it? And they know, well, that's how we got, I said, yeah, but if we continue on this cycle, no one's going to be learning it. And I explained to him, I didn't learn a thing when I was on my course. Where I got all my experience and knowledge was when I joined 5'9" Commando and Recce Troop. We want to change that. These guys as well, they're going to be serving alongside you. It's not like they're students that you'll never see again. These guys are going to be
Right.
maybe working alongside you. So for me, it was always is that I remember how I felt by my instructors, and I didn't want students to feel like that about me. You get respect not through shouting, you get respect through being an example. Again, these two instructors who were still on our course with us, they would come out every morning, they scream and shout, and then they tell the students to do press ups. And then I would come out and I'd be like, afterwards, I'm like, well, what were they shouting about? And the students like, I don't know. They just generally didn't know. So they didn't know what they were being punished for. It just was like a routine. And so for me, when I did raise my voice to them, they felt genuinely disappointed because they felt like they'd personally let me down. Because I was very, one of the students at the end, right at the end of one of the courses, he used to call me the smiling assassin. He's like, we could never work you out. He said, because you're very nice. But then when it came to it, my punishment was 10 times worse than theirs.
Ah,
But what I would also do with my punishment, if I'm doing press up, I would do them with them. I wouldn't ask of them that I couldn't do myself. And I saw that a lot with some instructors. They would be shouting and things. And I'm like, well, you do that then. And that they probably
interesting.
couldn't. And so for me, I could get away with it because I'm doing it with them rather than just standing there above them and screaming and shouting. So for me, you had to be an example. And I also got more out of them as well, being approachable, being able to talk to them one on one or as a group rather than feeling feared about approaching instructors. And so yeah, I got more out of my students than what the other instructors did.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not something that you would expect. Obviously, the stereotype, for the
Yeah,
drill instructor
yeah,
is exactly what you've described. So, it clearly is a unique approach. But it also, so something else that started coming about was the confidence you had to be humble, the confidence you had to show humility,
yeah,
even with such that you would get down and do the push-ups with them,
yeah.
that you didn't need to be over them showing dominance. So where did where did that humility come from? I mean, is that something you picked up along the way? Was it something you had as a kid? I mean, where did that come from?
I think it's something I may have picked up. When as I was going through my own courses in the military, I was seeing the good things from instructors and I was seeing the bad things. I think for me it was more I was confident in my own abilities. I was confident as an instructor. I sort of maybe with the other instructors that scream and shout, they more it's probably more of an internal thing. They're not confident or they feel intimidated and they feel like they need to express themselves like verbally and things like that. So for me, I didn't need to prove anything to these guys. I mean, I was very comfortable in my own abilities, and so yeah, that sort of helped as well. But yeah, I think for me, it was just literally, that when I did the commando course, I'd done so many courses before, I just took the good and bad out of instructors. I saw some, I was like a sponge. I was
Were
like,
there,
I don't like that. Okay.
were there a lot of instructors that started picking up on this as well? Did this become more of a thing? Obviously, as you said, they kind of got rid of the old guard, but was your
Mm.
style of training becoming something that you'll find more often now going through the commando course, or were you just
Yeah, no,
completely unique?
no, 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 no. I mentioned those two instructors, but my rest of my instructors were on the same sort of mindset as well.
Cool.
Because for us, as long as they're hitting the standards, for us, the concern with everyone is that the standards are lowering that people are passing. And I don't like that as well. I don't think standards should be low. If you don't hit the bar, then you don't get in. And so for me, if they're still hitting the bar and we don't have to scream and shout at them, or we're getting more across the bar because we're not getting them injured through doing additional PT and things like that, then it's great. So it's the balance that the standards are maintained, but you still have fun. You can still have fun. It doesn't have to be hell for 10 to 12 weeks. So, our selection, the tier one special force is 6 months long. If you were living in fear for 6 months, it's like, it wouldn't be fun. And so, one of the ethoses of the special forces, one is humility, which you touched on, but the other is humor as well.
Yes,
You
I
need,
saw that.
you need to have a sense of humor, especially when it gets dark as well.
Yeah, you talk about that in the book actually.
Yeah.
And that's pretty powerful. You do have to have even a dark sense of humor is going to carry you a long way under those tough conditions. Um, and you talk about also in going for SBS selection. Uh, you said something about how I didn't worry. I'm going to quote you. Let me actually quote you.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
You said, I didn't worry about what would happen when I put dive kit on my back. For one thing, lugging the heavy dive rig around Portsmouth kept my upper body in good shape, but I'm also a big believer that tabbing is as much a mental thing as it is physical. You're never going to be comfortable tabbing no matter how much you train. You said your shoulders are going to ache, the straps will cut into you. It's a strong mind that will get you through it. And you said, I've seen plenty of gifted athletes ditch their kit and give in because of a break in their minds, not their bodies. For them, their mental discipline could not withstand discomfort.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, from your perspective, does this kind of process to come out the other side of selection, does it ultimately come down to how much discomfort you can withstand mentally? Or is it
Yeah.
something else about the mindset?
No, I think it is. I think that, well, there's an element of discomfort mentally, but there's also self-analyzing. I always say you can't be experienced without experiences. So when I was on selection, I've done, when I was an instructor on the commando course, we used to do 30 milers with the students at the end of their thing to get their green beret. So I knew, selection's not asking you to you know, uh, be able to do triple backward somersaults and do throwing stars and ninja. Basically, selection is doing the basics and the basics well. The instructors will play with your mind a bit. A good example is you have these checkpoints. You go from hill to hill to hill, and you've got to get there in certain times. And so I remember on my course, I never got an opportunity to go on any recce's and do any pre-training because I was a senior diving instructor at the dive school at the time. And so I didn't have any time for that. But there were other guys on the course who knew those routes inside out. They probably didn't even need to get their map and compass out because they'd recce'd them.
Mm.
I always remember this one day getting to the checkpoint, and these guys had got there similar time to me, and they knew that was the end of the day. That was the last checkpoint. I didn't know it was the last checkpoint. They knew it was the last checkpoint, and the instructor then got his map out and gave them another grid, which was about 5 miles away. And these guys just gave up because in their head they'd accomplished what they thought they had for the day.
I,
I didn't know that, and I just carried on walking. I went to the next one, and he screened me back, and he said, "No." He said, "That's it. They're testing you." So what it is again, it's not that discomfort. It's with the special forces. It's like expect surprises, and it's not the end until it's officially end. But the discomfort wise, it's really interesting. Yeah, because some people are better in discomfort than others. Some people
right.
have been in those discomfort positions before and know how their body reacts. And for me, again, experience, you can't be experienced without experiences. I just take into that, what did I do before? How did I get through that situation? What were the lessons that I learned from that taken into this? And a good example about the differences, the mindset of the special forces, is a lot of people compare professional sports people to special forces. They said they have the same mindset. They have this. It's the same sort of career path is that they pursue that career to be the best that they can be.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of crossovers and synergies, but there are actually a lot of differences between professional and special forces. And it comes to, and I call it clean PT and dirty PT.
Okay.
So what the professional sports people are used to is that clean PT. Nutritionally wise, they're on a good diet. They're on a stable diet. Their calorific intake is where it should be. They're hitting their proteins, their carbs, their fats. They're having massages. They're having ice baths. They know that they're going to go on that football field and play 80 minutes, and that's it. There's no hidden surprises. And then they're going to have a massage at the end. And so they're used to that. Their motivations of the crowd is money. Special forces, we don't have any of that. You don't know what your calorific intake is. You don't know when you're going to sleep next. It's going to be rainy. It's going to be dirty. Maybe may go over on your ankle, but you need to keep going. So you can stick a special forces person in a professional sports team and no problem at all. Do it the reverse, they'll have a nightmare because they don't have that discomfort mindset.
Yeah, it's that the unpredictable nature of things
Exactly.
will destroy people. Like you said, you think you're done.
Yeah.
In fact, you've already wrote it off in your mind. It's done. And then no, no, you're not done.
Yeah.
In fact, you don't know when it's going to be done, and that's it. You break.
Yeah.
Um,
There's
so
a
it's that.
famous there's a famous rower actually from UK, so Steve Redgrave. I mean, it's the most gold medals for the Britain team. I think he's got about 8 or 10, over the years. And what a machine this guy is. You see him on the concept two rower, and he goes till he falls off. He went and did one of these Atlantic rowing things and came off. Because he wasn't getting the rest that he's used to. He wasn't getting the food that he's used to. He was in an environment which kept changing. So yeah, that's why I always use him as an example.
So uh, before I ask, well, okay, so what makes the individual that can do the dirty PT, that can deal with the unpredictable mind games of it all? I'm going to actually pull out something here that I wanted your comment on, because you maybe addressed it, although
Yeah.
there may be something else to it. But what you mentioned was, because you said the instructors would play mind games with you
Oh yeah, yeah.
to break your will. And you mentioned how the directing staff would deliberately attempt to undermine your confidence and push the candidates to second guess themselves. So it wasn't just about, like you said, hey, you think you're finished. Oh, no, no, you're not finished. It wasn't just that kind of mind game.
I know.
They made you doubt yourself. But what's even more profound, and I think perhaps the real Achilles heel for many, is the deep-seated need, as you said, for validation. You said that often guys, it was often that guys from the really rough childhoods who would pass special forces selection because they never relied on external validation. Can you talk about this? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so a lot of the guys in special forward, not all, we have people from all sort of backgrounds, but the majority of them, yeah, are from humble beginnings.
Mm.
They've grown up on the streets, they've been fighting. It's from the local, they're from the council estate, so they've already got an element of resilience growing up before they even gone into the military. In my book, I talk about I was in a homeless home in Moss Side in Manchester, the most dangerous place in
Hmm.
UK in the 80s. So I remember actually I was guest speaking at the Limston, which is the commando school, back in 2019, and the commanding officer said to me afterwards, he said, how do we teach resilience to these young kids coming in now, because they're not, compared to when we were going on course, the numbers aren't coming through. And I said, you can't. I said, resilience is taught from the moment they're born to when they get in. So you're going to have different people from different backgrounds, different characters. And so that's why when people say, how can you train the mindset to have discomfort? That's already ingrained in them, I
Mm.
think, before they've even come in through the camp gates. Not to say that those that haven't had humble beginnings still can't do it. There is an element of that. But I think that does help a lot of them as they're going through, because they've been there with nothing. They've had to fight. And again, the validation one's really interesting you touch on, because people say to me, what's the difference between tier 2 and tier 1 special forces? So
Right.
tier 2 special forces, we touched on, like the commando course, the Navy SEALs, the Green Berets, Rangers. You see buds, and they're screaming and shouting. They're screaming and shouting at the students.
Mhm.
But what tier 2 special forces is doing is wanting you to then, yes, they're obviously testing your mindset, but they want you to build together as a team. It's all about formulating teamwork and working together as a team, regardless what the instructors are saying. And
Mhm.
then you will get validation. You will get feedback from the instructors on how you're doing.
Right.
Tier 1 special forces, they don't even shout at you. They don't need to shout at you, because the course is that hard enough. And then what they're looking for is self-motivation. Yeah. So that's the big difference between tier 2 and tier 1. And some guys don't like it. Some guys want that feedback. And so when an instructor tells you you're not doing well, they believe that, and it starts eating them in the mind. But we know that, being instructors as well, we know the mind, we know what their mindset is and what they're doing. So, but one key takeaway I got from my chief instructor on selection was, he said, don't fail yourself. No, no, yeah, he said, don't fail yourself, let us fail you. So
Oh,
basically, until he's told you you're off the course, you're still on that course, regardless what they're saying. Because what they're looking for is, again, they're looking for your attributes. And this is a key one as well. A good friend of mine, Rich Davini, he has a
oh,
book, The attributes, yeah. So he was a SEAL Team 6 officer on the selection process. And he would have these candidates coming in, these rock stars from the SEALs. These guys have done numerous tours, coming top of their class, blah, blah, blah. But they were coming in and they were failing. They were still having a high failure rate because they hadn't experienced resilience. They hadn't come across other individuals who were probably better than them. Now they're not top of the class. They're probably middle of the class. How are they dealing with that? How are they dealing with that information? They're getting shot, they're being told they're not that good. Some of them, their egos were too big. They didn't like it. And so they changed the whole selection process. Not the whole selection process. They changed the majority of the selection process for SEAL Team 6, rather than testing them physically and on their attributes, how they deal with certain situations. And so that's the big difference between tier 2 and tier 1. You won't get validation. You won't get shouted at. You get treated like an adult. Again, if you're behind enemy lines on your own, you're having to escape and evade, and you need an instructor to give you motivation, you're not going to get that. You're on your own.
Yeah, that's probably the best explanation that I've ever heard on the difference. That really crystallizes it, I think. That's awesome. Okay, so you were talking about how as you start to wind down or start to complete Special Forces selection, you have to go through jungle training,
Mm.
which you kind of talked about how that strips soldiering down to its like bare essentials, and your basic skills and drills, they're refined, your patrolling techniques are polished, but you also said the experience offers, quote, moments of awe. You mentioned this was a time for you of profound learning and growth.
Mm.
um, so I'd love to understand that better. You said you said, quote, I had come on selection to test myself, but I was getting so much more in return. What were you getting in return? What were these moments of what was this,
I think again, I think for selection for me, so the jungle phase, we go to Brunei for 6 weeks, but you do 28 days solid in the jungle. And that's it. You're dropped in the jungle and you're there for 28 days. And I mean, you go through all the patrolling stuff as you touched on, but there's a lot of time because in the jungle, as soon as it gets dark, you can't move in the jungle. You're literally so there was a lot of time of self-analyzing. I was living a lifestyle that was high tempo, high tempo, high tempo. But all of a
Mhm.
sudden, it's like just pausing. I was seeing guys, some great operators leaving the jungle. They were leaving. They were eating themselves in their mind. They hadn't done. They're not good enough, or they may have got a letter from their wife who's having a bad day, and then it takes another 2 weeks for the next letter to come back when she's saying she's all right. So there was a lot of things there. So for me, it was really sort of proud of where I was, especially from where I came from. So yeah, for me, I just thought the hill phase is pass, but there was just a lot of self-analyzing, and time to think on my own, if that made sense. So I got more. It's almost like I wouldn't even say it was a meditation. It probably was. It probably was. It was just the first time that I
Mm.
I really had time to sort of have time on my own. Yeah. I'd say that's what I got the most out of it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I
Yeah.
was going through a messy breakup at the time as well. And so for me, I remember the chief instructor saying, come on this course with no welfare issues. You want to make sure that you haven't got any distractions at the back of your mind at home. There's issues with wives or, come in here with a clear head.
Hmm.
I didn't have that. I had loads of stuff going on. But what was great for me is with the fact that no one could get in touch with me. I was
Right.
in this place on earth where no one could get hold of them. And for me, that was just bliss. And I think maybe it was that I was referencing as well.
Yeah, I mean that would drive a lot of other people crazy. So that,
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's pretty phenomenal. Another point I wanted to raise, just again back on that, back on the mindset, we're talking about validation, we're talking about dealing with the unpredictable nature of things. You also brought up something else, which a lot of people, and a lot of things we're talking about here, whether it's the unpredictable nature of life. The instructors will play mind games with you, but life's going to play mind games with you. Validate, what are you going to do if you don't get any kudos, if you don't get any pats on the back, right? Like how you going to, how you going to learn to become self-motivated? These are all things that although you're having to deal with them in special forces, I mean, you're going to try to achieve at the highest levels of life. You're going to get hit with the same things. One of those things you mentioned is really interesting. So you said another crucial point that how the mind needs to function under pressure. You said, so here's a quote: the drills and the skills we were performing in the jungle weren't easy, but they were basic, right? It was only when lads pressured themselves into trying to do too much
Mm.
that they'd F it up. Some
Yeah.
of them would even just stand up and leave because they'd psyched themselves out.
Yeah.
So can you delve into how do you maintain focus and what type of attitude is necessary truly to handle the immense expectations that are not necessarily placed on you,
Mm.
but that you place on yourself?
Mm. Yeah, I always say pressure is self-induced. Yes, you will get that pressure from external, from the instructors, but you know that's coming anyway. But there's a lot of self-induced pressure people put in. People say to me, "Oh, that's that's gonna be difficult. That's self-induced pressure." Yeah, it's not to say I don't. You don't. You're not thinking about it, but you just
Mhm.
don't let it rule your life. You know what I mean? I think the key one as well in the jungle, as I mentioned with the chief instructor, that key one for me was when he said, "Let us fail you, don't fail yourself." And so even if I had that little bit of doubt, I was like, well, I haven't been told yet. I haven't been told yet. And you also have to, without sounding egotistical, you also have to, it was hard selection seeing guys leave. It was hard seeing them leave, whether they got injured or whether they decided to leave.
Mhm.
But for me, that just then built me even more confidence. Is that, well, I'm doing something right because I'm still here. And so it wasn't just my self-induced pressure. I was also looking at the environment around me. I was looking at the instructors. And you have to have an element of confidence. Is that, I remember, I think I talk about it in my book. I remember one of the instructors coming up to me on the very first day. And we go back probably about 18 months before. I was in recce troop with the commandos, and the SAS were in town training. And
Mhm.
a good friend of mine was in the SAS, and he said, "Oh, we're downtown having a few drinks." So I went downtown and joined him. I'd already had too many drinks. So I went in this bar, and it's full of SAS guys. And I sort of made a joke about, who was the toughest before I walked in, sort of thing. And these SAS guys are like, "Who's this guy?" Anyway, fast forward in that evening, we're all doing karaoke. The atmosphere is relaxed. Totally forgot about that. Fast forward 18 months, and I'm in the jungle, just landed in the jungle, and I'm on my belt buckle, and this instructor kneels down next to me, and he said, "Who was the toughest before I walked in?" So he was clearly in that bar.
Wow.
And I said, "Oh, it's me." Because you have to have a sense of humor. And he said, "Do you think you're going to pass this course?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's confidence." I said, "Yeah." I said, "But if you're confident in your ability, if I wasn't confident in my ability or I had any doubt, I would have said no, but I'm confident in my ability." So yeah, so it's that self-induced pressure. Is what you deal with, it's how you cope with those pressures. Not to say you're not under pressure. It's just what you do with that. I talk about people when they say they're nervous. I take that nervous energy and I like to turn it into positive energy.
Mhm.
I mean, I like to take that energy because it's good energy. You just need to sort of deal with it and
Redirected.
yeah, and yeah, redirect it in another way.
Yeah, no, powerful stuff. And yeah, that's in the book. It's great.
Yeah,
It's
all right,
that
mate.
guy was actually in the bar and
Oh,
he comes back at you.
oh, that great. And that was the icebreaker. I thought, here we go. It's going to be a long, a long 6 weeks in the jungle.
Well, but you made it, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing. You achieved the dream. You became a tier one operator. Um, and in the book, you don't talk about the missions that you've been on, and that's understandable. I mean, given the clandestine nature of your work,
Mm.
and the UK's Official Secrets Act doesn't make it easy, but
Yeah.
you described that period of your life as one of the most intense,
Mm.
filled with your closest friendships and doing a job that you loved,
Yeah.
but that career that you loved was cut short when in the midst of pre-deployment training for a parachute jump, your leg got caught up in the rigging as you came out of the plane midair, and the rigging nearly tore your leg off your body,
Yeah.
and you almost blacked out from the pain. But you had to force yourself to stay conscious for 30 minutes until you made it to the ground, right? Because the pain was strong, was so intense that your body was going into shock, and you was going to shut it down. You were just going to go unconscious. You had to stop that, and
Mm.
then you had to drift down for 30 minutes. So what I'm wondering is, beyond the physical agony,
Mm.
what was going through your mind during a descent that must have felt like forever?
Yeah, so it was a Halo descent. It was a high altitude, high opening. So Halo, which is skydiving, they'll jump out and then they'll fall and then they'll get to the ground. With Hey Ho, the parachute opens straight away, and then you're flying through the air. That's why you're in the air for 30 minutes, because you're flying horizontally as you're descending to a target area. Um, so what was going through my mind, my initial one when I looked up, my leg was caught, was I need to clear that in time before the parachute opens. That didn't happen. My leg got pulled up and over to my right. And as you touched on, I'd never experienced pain like it. It was a pain I'd never want to feel again. And because of the pain, I was vomiting. It was that bad. But the air was so thin. We're at 15,000 feet when we exit, which is the limits before you have to actually go on O2. So the air is quite thin. And as you touched on, I was drifting in and out of consciousness. Um, I had communications with the guys. There's no point in coming over the net and telling them I've got a sore leg, because there's nothing that they can do. And so I sort of quickly did an assessment. Well, I have a parachute, which is a canopy, which is great. My leg is there, it's sore. My first worry was landing it. I was like, because landings can be quite precarious, and so but then landing with one leg, I need to land on my good leg. So really, my focus was stay with a group and make sure you land. And I landed one-legged. It was a great landing.
Yes.
But as I was descending, I did know I had this feeling that it was 2 weeks before we were going back out to Afghanistan on another tour. I sort of knew that I wasn't going to be on that tour. I'd hoped that wasn't the case, but I always had the worst case scenario. I mean that was highlighted to me that afternoon when I had the MRI scan. I tore my ACL, my MCL, lateral meniscus in my knee, hamstring, my calf, and my quadricep. And so for me, it was a huge sucker punch, because I was 16 years now in the military. And as you touched on, I was now in a unit working alongside like-minded individuals, had the same drive, same passion. It was the busiest time in UK and US Special Forces history. You had two conflicts going on. You had the anti-piracy, there was hostage situations, there was all sorts going on. It was,
Mm.
we were ticking so much, doing these things that other operators hadn't done for the last 20, 30 years, and we were just literally doing them all the time. So for me, it wasn't what I wanted to do. And yeah, unfortunately, I got told, thank you for your time. It's time to leave. So I never had any ambitions of being a civilian or leaving the military. I would still be in now, and you would never know who Dean Stott was
Mm.
if it wasn't for that. Fast forward to where we are now, things happen for a reason. But at the time, it was difficult, and my wife Alana is very entrepreneurial.
Mm.
Key at this point in my life, because what I was as we go, I ended up having to leave the military, and I went
Mhm.
through what was known as an identity crisis. I knew what I was doing when in the military for the next 2 years, and working alongside these great individuals to what is my role within society. What do I do next? So that was hard, and I got to where I had in the special forces because of that physical robustness, because of that mental mindset. And I now couldn't even run 50 meters without my knee giving way. I'd
Right.
lost all that as well. So I lost my identity as an individual, but then also my personal identity as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's incomprehensible for most people to appreciate. Um, you'll hear stories like yours, but they're you just can't appreciate them. I think your book does a great job of kind of taking you through your journey so
Mm.
that people can understand what that's kind of like. But you bounce back, and you actually you end up and again Alana's seems to be a big part of your life, inspirational as well in this sense, certainly from an entrepreneurial perspective. and you ended up starting your own consultancy in the private security space.
Yeah.
And you're working with government security forces. You start working with like government security forces in hot spots around the world, Libya, Guinea, Yemen. You start working with the Kurdish Presidential Close Protection Team. So many people associate the effectiveness of special forces with their aptitude for direct violence of action-led operations. Yet
Mhm.
you emphasize to your clients that actually, displays of brute force and like the mad dog stares and shoving people out of the way, it's not necessarily the best solution when it comes to close protection. So, what lessons from your special forces career helped you convey the importance of adopting a different approach to the people you were training?
Yeah, I always blame Hollywood for this. I call it the biceps, the bullets, and the bombs. What you
Okay.
see on, your Dwayne Johnson, your Jason the Stathams, and all this thing. You see all that, which is called the offensive action. And so in the special forces, 25% of what we do is that offensive action, which
Okay.
is what we touched on. But that's normally the last resort. We don't automatically go for that. 50% of what we do in the special forces is support and influence. It's hearts and minds. It's being embedded as small teams with locals in some of these hotspots, understanding the demographics, the politics, the tribal influences, building those relationships with the locals as well. And so that's what I adopted more in the private security space. My first task was to help set up the British Embassy in Benghazi. So it was May 2011. And I soon identified that the Libyans didn't want to be in another Afghan or Iraq. A lot of my friends now, because of the anti-piracy, had their own companies. So I didn't want to get into that space and be competing with my friends. I didn't want to be going out to Afghan and Iraq, working on these
Hmm.
these sweet projects or working in the oil and gas. I wanted to find a niche within the industry. I hadn't found it yet. But Alana, as you touched on, very entrepreneurial, set up our first security company on her phone. She was a bank manager for three or four big banks from Santander in the northeast of Scotland. So, for me, I joined the army at 17 and I was now 33. I didn't know anything about the corporate world and I just assumed everyone was the same as the military. They look after each other. Lana's like, no, no, I'll deal with the contracts. You just do what you do. And so yeah, when I was in Libya, soon I identified, like I said, the Libyans didn't want to be in Afghan and Iraq. Once Gaddafi had fallen, they wanted to take control of their country. And I was sitting in on these meetings, and I was listening to, I call them the big five, the biggest security companies in the world.
Okay.
And they were chatting with oil and gas NGOs, and they were offering this crisis management and evacuation plans. And, I'd end up subcontracting for these companies and realizing there's actually nothing in place. So I said to Alana, I think I have an idea, and so I went. There was a huge proliferation of weapons at the time,
Hmm.
so I bought 30 weapons off the black market, and I buried them between Tunis and Egypt. Put comms kit in there, put money in there, um, and just designed these evacuation plans. We lived in Aberdeen, which is the oil and gas capital of Europe, so it's like
Right.
Houston of Europe, and so I had access to these oil and gas companies and some of the subsidiaries, and I just sold them my evacuation plan, hopefully never needing to use it. And then the great thing I had with Alana as well is I didn't have pressure to bring in the money, so it was very an ad hoc basis. Each time my phone would go off, it'd be a new country, it'd be a new task. When you tell people you're in security and the way you look like they think you're a doorman from the local nightclub, because of the way you look. But actually, security is such a broad spectrum, surveillance, maritime security, consultancy, coaching, mentoring, cybersecurity. It's huge. And so I was learning about the industry as a whole. I was building a great network in all these countries. And so I didn't have that pressure. For example, one of them I was training the Kurdish Special Forces. The next phone call, I'm taking the UAE Royal Family Super Yacht from Barcelona to the Maldives.
Right.
You're in Brazil with a Soccer World Cup. You're in London doing the Olympics. You're taking clients from Cape Town to Nairobi. It was amazing. But I was learning a lot because when you're in the military, they will only show you what you need to see, which is part of your mission. When you're in the private security, you get to see a bigger picture. Uh,
Mm.
and yeah, as in my book said, I ended up doing more sensitive jobs as a civilian than I did when I was in the military because I wasn't underneath the government umbrella. I had free access to do stuff and take those risks where they probably weren't allowed to.
Yeah, and what really stands out is because again, like you said, the Hollywoodification of what you guys do. You said the bullets, the bombs. What was the other B? Bullets, the bombs, and
Biceps, bullets, and bombs.
right,
Biceps.
biceps. um, but what a lot of people don't realize is, so now what you're bringing to the civilian world
Mm,
is, because I think you said it. You said where a lot of your skills really lie is in not the 25% of your job, but the winning of the hearts and the minds.
yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with, your ability to be strategic, to create plans, the whole thing you were doing and the whole thing you were selling with respect to the evacuation, kind of like an insurance policy should they need
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Like so much thinking goes into this. All this stuff you're doing, you're not necessarily going out there and shooting people. Like
No.
this is all like deep, deep
Mm,
strategy, complex thought, right? Conflict resolution. And a lot of people don't realize that these are the tier one skills that you're learning
yeah.
doing the job that you're doing. That's what you were bringing, I think, to the civilian sector.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my wife says, Alana says, my USP is that I can communicate with anyone from any culture, any background. And a good example as well. I took a lot of risks in the early days and built those relationships. A good example is Somalia, Mogadishu. A friend of mine was representing probably the biggest private security company out there. He'd gone out there. He was like their development director and
Hmm.
wanted to get a partner in Mogadishu. Um, but he was being hosted by a local security company who wouldn't give him flexibility or freedom to go where he wanted and introduce him to the right people.
Hmm.
And they wanted to do a retainer for like $1 or $2 million a month. And he's like, look, so he said, look, Dean, they don't know you. He said, can you go in and find me a local partner? So I flew into Mogadishu. Everyone stayed on the airbase. I grabbed my bag and I just walked straight out the airport, walked up the airport road, and checked myself into it's called the Peace Hotel, actually, of all places.
Oh,
And, and I got there, and the manager's like, right, you're going to need this. Gave me an AK and a pistol for my room and things like that. But I then started building up a relationship. I ended up meeting a good gentleman, actually. He's from London, actually. He's
hmm.
based in London. He's got French background, and he had a security company. And believe it or not, we could have all done this in the UK if I knew about his details. But I was sat there. He took me to his house, met his family, sat on the floor. We had shared bread, coffee, and food. And he said, "Look," he said, "Dean, I must get emails, like 5 to 10 emails a day from security companies in the UK and the US wanting to work with me, and they all offer the same sort of services, which is hard, to see through." He said, "But you've come in here and that's something I used to go into the country and actually understand the atmospherics and what's actually happening on the ground and not what's being perceived by the media monster, as I call it." He
Right.
said, "You've taken the risk to come in here. You've sat down with my family. You showed me respect, and that's why I'll do business with you."
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of the civilian population don't know, don't appreciate, don't understand that the among the superpowers that you walk away with is that ability. I mean, like they say, you could walk into a country with a handful of tier one operators and end up, essentially overturning the government and setting up a new authority. And because that's again what you get trained in. It's not just the physical stuff, but the thing is, you still end up constantly being in life or death situations. These aren't like you said, you're walking the streets of Mogadishu and they got to put an AK-47 in your room, right? Like that's just like by the by. But
Yeah.
but the reality is your wife Alana, she recognizes that, hey, you're not out of harm's way. In fact, you're like you, you could at any moment they might get a call that you've been killed, right?
Mm,
So she ends up saying that because you're putting yourself in these high risk situations, and because your emotions, you didn't even see it.
yeah.
Like you said, you become so numb, even though you weren't in special forces anymore. You're constantly putting yourself in these situations where like you had it, like you were in the like zone, tunnel
Yeah.
vision, to the point where like you're coming home with blood on your
Mm,
shirt, and like you're like, oh yeah, no problem. It's just a little blood. It's like whose blood? It's almost like, so she tells you, Dean, this is only going to end one of two ways.
Mm.
You'll either be dead or we'll be divorced. And
Yeah.
and so you were kind of like that hit you super hard, because it turns out that that actually was a pretty great way of transitioning out of the high risk lifestyle that you had become accustomed to,
Yeah.
right? Like maybe not as on the razor's edge, but pretty close to it. And what you said was you were this hit you so hard because you were so deep in the work, that you were basically addicted,
Yeah.
not just to the money, but to the adrenaline, the high pressure, the life and death situations. And so I'm going to quote you. You said, I was addicted to the work. I was addicted to war zones in the same way some got hooked on drugs or gambling. You said, I needed it in my life. And it was only when it was missing in my life that I felt uneasy, not the other way around. Now, Dean, I've spoken with many other special operators who talk about this very same addiction. And
Mm.
almost everyone from the special operations community describes this fixation or this dependency on that war zone rush as one
Yeah.
of the biggest challenges of transitioning to civilian life. Going from the razor's edge, from life or death, from adrenaline fueled environment to the hamster wheel of
Mm.
civilian life can feel like a race car going from 200 miles per hour to hitting a wall.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on the addiction, and
Yeah.
how real that is?
Yeah, I think for me, going back to my injury, I didn't want to leave. I felt like I was robbed of that opportunity to carry on in that line of work. But then obviously I then wanted to build up a reputation within the industry. And so I was always out the door. That year when Alana and I had that conversation, I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar. I
Wow.
had a young daughter, I had a family, I had Alana as a wife. The sort of to add some context to the story for the listeners, to that point, in 2012, when your American ambassador got killed in Benghazi, I was
Mhm.
there that evening and I single-handedly evacuated an oil company from there to Tripoli. Because of the success of that, 2 years later, I evacuated the Canadian embassy on my own for Libya to Tunis. And that was when we had blood on the shirt. I was administering first aid at a road traffic collision at the border. It wasn't anything to do with the task that we're on.
Mhm.
And so I came back from that task, and Alana's like, you've only been home 21 days. And we sat down and had the conversation. So there was an element of me trying to match that adrenaline rush without actually coming to terms with the fact that I'd left the military. These missions were successful, they were great, but should something have gone wrong, or should I be in need, I didn't have the SF community. I didn't have AC-130 Spectre gunships. I didn't have Apache gun. I didn't have drones. I didn't have the guys coming to rescue me. You're on your own, and
Right.
so that risk was there. But what it came down to is actually because Alana and I are business partners. I thought Alana wanted me to leave to build up the business. I thought we needed. But we didn't need money. Alana now had a great successful property development business, and she thought I wanted to leave because I was an adrenaline junkie, and that wasn't really the case.
Mm.
So it was miscommunication. I mean, we then realized actually I didn't need to be going away, I didn't want to be going away. I thought, so we then changed the way that whole model. But as you said, it had to be that conversation. If you keep going, you will be dead or divorced. And so it's not to say that I don't go away anymore, but what I do is I get it signed off by the family, as in by
Right.
Alana and the kids. I don't just say yes to everything. So it has to be a crucial job for me to sort of really leave the door now.
But with that, I mean, that was something that kind of transpired over time. You were able to slowly digest how you were going to, kind of walk away from that being your 24/7 reality. But ultimately, I'm curious, how do you transition from, um, being addicted to that war zone lifestyle, and to come back and just
Yeah, I
live a
don't
normal life.
I don't think it's the war zone lifestyle. I think for me is I have to have a purpose. I need to be doing something. I have to keep busy. I have a great analogy. Your body's like a river. It needs to keep flowing. As soon as you stop, it becomes stagnant. You have illness and things like. But for me, it's like, yeah, keep flowing, but it doesn't always have to be a grade 6 waterfall.
Right.
So, and,
Okay.
and and so for me, it's not so much I was a war junkie. I always wanted to, um, I keep myself physically and mentally engaged. So you can do that through skydiving. You can do that through other ways of doing that. But for me, it was almost as I wanted to have a purpose of service, being able to give back to people. I was doing that when I was in the military, and that was absent now. How could I always give back? Well, Lana and I work a lot in the non-profit space. We do a lot with
Right.
veterans. Lana does a lot in the human trafficking, and then that's where the evacuations really then took off for me. It's like, well, I don't need to be going away all the time, but I can put these plans in place, and then when I'm needed, I can give back more than maybe others.
Well, speaking of Alana, the genius of her idea to kind of solve that gap in, okay, what's your purpose? What do you, right? She comes up with this brilliant idea. She she gives you the Guinness Book of World Records,
Yeah,
and she says, um, hey, look through this, pick one of these, right? Look, read through this book and pick one.
yeah,
And you said that once you started reading the Guinness book, right? So, okay, so you're out of special forces. Now you've got to wind down from contracting because, as she said to you, look,
mm,
we're going to get divorced, you're going to end up dead. This
yeah,
isn't, we can't go on this way. And you end up like you have this Guinness book and you start looking through it and you said, I was like a starving man thrown a loaf of bread. And
yeah,
and that you were certain that in the Guinness book you would find exactly what you needed to fill the desire for challenge
yeah.
that you said had burned in you since you'd been in the army. How did that hunt for a challenge begin to kind of recalibrate your mind and your body from where you were to kind
Yeah.
of having to find another way to get this, like you said, you could do it with skydiving, you could do it, but how did that start to help you recalibrate?
Yeah, it wasn't a decision like straight away. Once I decided, right, I was taking a sabbatical from the security industry and I was going to work with Alana in
Hmm.
proper developing. You
Hmm.
know, it's probably 5 years now after my injury to where we are at this point in my life. And
Okay.
my injured leg now was 2 kilos or 4.4 pounds lighter than my good leg because of the muscle wastage. So I'd sort of neglected my own physical well-being because I'd been so busy on work. And so I just bought a road bike off Amazon and I would cycle to and from the office. And as I touched about earlier, physical robustness was one of my key things. But straight away, being fit, I couldn't run, but being physically active again, getting the lungs going, I felt like there was a huge weight off my shoulders. And already I could feel mentally in a better space just by cycling 8 miles
Right.
to and from the office. And then, so I'm now sat in we now had our second child, Tommy. I'm sat in the corner because Alana's the one who's got the business. And the architects and planners, they're chatting to her. And I wasn't, if you heard my backstory, I wasn't really interested in it. I'm just sat there with my son, and Alana could see that glaze in my eyes. Is that right?
Right.
You need to do something to keep physically and mentally engaged. And so I always read the Guinness Book of Records as a young boy. I was always fascinated. I used to get every year at Christmas, and I used to be fascinated in all these sort of these endurance projects or someone eating 20 Ferrero Rochers in a minute, something like that. I was always fascinated. And I said to Lana, I said, well, I fancy doing a world record. It's about a month before my 40th birthday. So I was having a midlife crisis as well. I was like, what is my
Okay.
legacy? What is my next purpose? And she said, well, what are you thinking? I said, well, cycling's good because it's not impacting my knee. I had to find something that my injury wasn't going to be an issue with. And then it was then that she flicked to the cycling pages. I was thinking maybe east to west coast to Scotland. We actually did look at Cairo to Cape Town, but majority of my
Okay.
security work I'd done in Africa. I'd seen the continent. And so, which is, well, what about this one? And it was the Pan American Highway, and it was the world's longest road, which runs from southern Argentina to northern Alaska. And I said, perfect, that's the one. And so having only cycled, it sounds quite arrogant, but having only cycled 20 miles, I applied for the world record. And yeah, Guinness came back and said, yeah, you've been successful on your application. So it really took my energy and focus to something else.
Right. And that's, you're right. So the context there was this wasn't actually right after she said, look, we're either divorced or
Yeah, yeah.
you're dead. It actually, you, from that point, you decided to take a sabbatical from contracting, and you went to work with her in the
Yeah.
property development business,
Yeah.
and you felt your soul getting crushed because you're like, what do I do? It's almost like
That
that's
hamster,
that
that hamster wheel you talked about, it was
that's
probably,
yeah, that's it. That's the hamster wheel, right? Like for you, it's like, how do you go from being a 200-mile-per-hour race car to that? And that's when she comes up with the idea, hey, wait a second. Um, you know, we got to get you back into where your DNA is, which is all about challenge for you. It's clear. Like you got to
yeah.
have challenge, you got to have competition. And so, but here's the part I love about you picking this crazy, I mean, like to pick of all the things to pick, like you said, you were cycling back and forth to work 20, 20 miles or 30 miles a day. And now you're going to go, and it's like this beast is 14,000 miles.
Yeah.
And so you were like, hey, um, the record is 125 days.
Yeah.
And so you decide you're going to do it. Oh, actually, yeah, the record's 125 days. And then actually, while you're considering this, someone else breaks the record.
Beats it. Yeah. Within that 6 week period of the
Yeah,
application,
you're
someone
like,
then
holy
beat it. Yeah.
shit. Now you've got to, so now you're like, okay, I'm going to do it in 110 days.
Mm.
But here's the best part. You said it, quote, in my mind, I was already picturing myself crossing the finish line. You said the result was not in doubt. You said I'd beat the record, you'd smash the record, and that was that. Where where does that level, where does that confidence come from?
Um, so yeah, so again, more context to your listeners, it was 117 days was the world record. And the reason I was aiming for 110 days, I'd spoken to, one of the reasons we're the best special forces in the world isn't because we have the best caliber of guys or best training. It's because we're always learning, we're always evolving, learning from our mistakes. I think the Americans call it a wash up. We call it a hot debrief.
Mm,
When we're on the ground in the special forces, whether on operations training or whatever we're doing, before we go shower, clean our weapons or get changed, we have a hot debrief, and it's three simple questions. It's what worked, what didn't work, and what would you do differently? And so for me, I wasn't a cyclist. I bought these bike cycling magazines. I started researching about cycling. I bought a couple of books on the Pan American Highway, but it wasn't giving me that critical information to help me make a plan. And so I reached out to the previous record holders. The guy, Scott Napier, who did it in 125 days.
mhm.
Carlos, the Mexican guy, he did it in 117 days. I
Okay.
met a couple of guys, Axel and Andreas, who had the South America world record as a pair. And then Mark Beaumont, who's the world, he did round the world in 80 days. He also did the Pan American Highway. And I asked them that question. I didn't know what worked, what didn't work. And they all started in Alaska and finished in Argentina. But all their issues were in South and Central America, languages, spares to the bike. So being a military guy and the planning that goes into like some of these private security stuff, I thought, well, why take a gamble with the second half of the challenge? Why not address those issues early? So one of the things I was proudest of doing is not the fact, just because everyone else went that way didn't mean it was the right way. And I decided I was going to start from the bottom and go,
Wow.
not, people joke that you're going uphill, but that isn't the case. But then when I was looking at the planning,
Mhm.
I literally took a military set of orders and put it on this project. I just crossed out ammunition. I mean, because the military is great in their order process in planning.
Mhm.
And there was things that we were considering. There were the security issues, political wise. You're going through any of the countries of political unrest. I passed through Nicaragua 3 weeks later. There was a coup. I missed that by 3 weeks.
Wow.
We, yeah, um, we had a security. We had a documentary team and a support team with us as well. They're a bit
Mhm.
more risk averse than myself. I really had to. So this was really evolving into a big plan, and there was a lot of things that I could factor in, but there was things that were out of my control: natural disasters, coups, and third party influence. Maybe from the support team. So we have a thing in the military called fudge. When we're planning something,
Mhm.
we give ourselves a little bit of fudge. So if something goes over or we didn't foresee something, we
Mhm.
eat to that fudge. It's not the actual deadline as well. And so that's where the 110 days came in. It wasn't because I wanted to smash it by a week. I wanted to give myself that week's fudge. So should we encounter any issues that catch us out,
Ah,
eats into that. And that's where that decision came from. And then I just broke it down, you know, I just broke it down into countries, into days. And we had a thing called the Bible, the targets
yeah,
I need to be hitting. Yeah.
that's amazing.
Interesting enough, we had so I also was trying to raise £1 million for a mental health campaign with Royal Foundation.
That's right.
We were already 6 months out from doing the bike ride. I trained for just over a year. We had the welcome back party getting planned. Alana and I had done a fundraising event in Scotland. We raised £70,000, and £50,000 of that had to be the deposit for the Hilton Hotel in London, which was going to be for the welcome back party and fundraiser. So before I even set off on this challenge, 6 months before, we had a committee planning this welcome back party, and we had celebrities there. We had members of the royal family there, and a good friend of mine, Amanda, she was she was the events organizer. She's great at what she does. And she would ask, what is the contingency plan? And I never used to answer it. Alana said the contingency is we go to Dean's funeral. And that was it. That was it. It would just cut her out completely. Anyway, when I finished the challenge, I sat down with her, before we did the event. And I said, Amanda, I didn't answer your question because if I knew there was a contingency plan, when times get hard, when times get difficult, you naturally veer towards that contingency. You already know there's an alternative option. So there was no alternative option for this other than completing it. So I never gave myself that.
I love it. I love it. We're going to talk about that thing that Alana said in another question, but um, uh, you mentioned now the raising the money.
Yeah.
So yeah, you also decided to take on, like, it wasn't just as if the challenge of breaking the record isn't hard enough.
Yeah.
Like so you also decided to raise £1 million for a mental health charity spearheaded by your mate Prince Harry.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you also needed to secure sponsorships to fund the trek.
Yeah.
So it's like it wasn't just the enormity of the 14,000-mile ride, right? It's like all these other things that go along with it.
Yeah.
Why do you think you chose to take on so many layers of difficulty at once, right? Like it wasn't just the record. It was like what you were doing is, and this is what I was curious about. You were piling challenge on top of challenge on top of challenge, which, as you had said earlier, led many of the lads in SF selection who overloaded themselves and tried to do too much
Yeah.
and end up psyching themselves out. Why did you need to pile so much on?
So in sequential order, it was the world record we applied for first. And so when they came back, and the reason I wanted to do it for a world record is I had to have an objective to hit. That was my objective. That gave me a goal to hit. And so if I had a target, then that's what I'm going for. So that was more as a personal thing, was the world record, because you could probably go do that bike ride anyway and raise a hell of a lot of money for charity. Just
Absolutely.
It had to give me an objective to get up and train each day because we had a target to hit.
Okay.
Then once Guinness had said you've been successful, you mentioned Prince Harry. Him and I had done a lot in a non-profit space before, but never in public. And I rang him up. He told me about this mental health campaign his brother and Kate were doing to promote mental health. Everything from postnatal depression, young children, teenagers, all the way through to veterans as well. So I thought, well, that's the perfect challenge. And so he then introduced me to the Royal Foundation, who were sort of running that. And when I sat down with them, the first question they asked was, how much are you looking to raise? And so I just pulled £1 million out, Sky, because I wanted them to keep a seat at the table. I didn't want them to be walking, you can't go do the London Marathon and ask for £1 million sponsorship, try and raise £1 million. It had to be relatable to the task you were doing. And I thought this task was big enough to raise £1 million. So it kept them at the table. Okay. And then the next question they asked was, well, what is the message you're trying to promote? And I hadn't really thought about message. I was doing it because Harry had told me to. Right. But then I looked internally. I said, well, physical activity helps your mental state. And they said, well, you can't use that. I said, well, why not? This is 2017 now. I said, because it hasn't been scientifically proven. And I said, well, that's fine, but I don't need a scientist to tell me that I feel good when I train in. So I ignored a minute and carried on using that message, which now, is recognized as a coping mechanism. But Alana was coming in as the campaign director. So so I actually put a lot of the pressure on Alana. I said £1 million, so she's like, okay. Alana was running. I was confident in the team as well around you. But Alana has a business book called How to Ask for Money. She's
I
grew.
noticed that.
Yeah. And so she got me. I mean, you can imagine how difficult it is. I know professional or huge celebrities who struggle to get funding. But the mental health campaign Heads Together launched. So I started my bike ride in February 18.
Hmm.
It launched in April 2017 at the London Marathon. And now was the big topic of conversation to everyone about mental health, getting behind it and things like that. So I think the timing of that, of when we were looking for sponsorship, were mirrored up perfectly, because we ended up getting a FTSE 100 company, and they gave me £500,000 sponsorship as a non-cyclist. But they said, when you and Alana came in and pitched to our board, we believed what you said was gonna happen. It wasn't like, oh, we might do this. It's like, no, I've never cycled before, but I'm going to break the world record, and we're going to do it for this. Which was great, because then it meant all the money that they donated went through all the project costs, the flights for the teams, the train, everything that we did. So it meant every penny raised then went towards the charity. And
Nice.
we raised £930,000, which was about $1.4 million
Yeah.
back then when the exchange rate was on. So that was more impressive than the bike ride. But for me, the world record was my target.
Okay.
So doing it for a campaign meant that, for example, we had 11 mental health charities that we're raising money for. And one of them was called Place to Be. So Place to Be helps young children in school speak to counselors.
Okay.
When I spoke to them before going on the event, they'd said to me, well, the 100,000 that we will get from your challenge will enable 14,000 children to speak to counselors. So
Wow.
I related that to miles. So that means that every mile I'm cycling. So that gives you that additional motivation. There's the motivation of the world record, but then there's also the motivation of
Right.
those you're going to be helping.
You said something about giving yourself that world record because yeah, you could have raised money for doing you could have just you didn't have to make it a record to raise the money, but you gave it because it gave you a target. And actually this comes up in the book in another way. So I wanted to ask you about this because again, this speaks to your particular psychology. When you found your coach, well, actually, it was a new coach because the other guy was a bit negative. But
Yeah.
when you found your coach, Ken Bryson, when you told him about your plan to break the world record, you said you paid very close attention to his reaction.
Yeah.
And even though he had a split second of shock, as most people would,
Yeah.
his response was, "Hey, man, that sounds awesome. How can
Mm.
I help?" So you knew you had probably the right guy. But after you started training with him, you said that, like he's giving you all this time that you have to do on the bike. And, you ended up saying to him, hey, listen, I'm going nuts on the bike, just doing time, not knowing what's the purpose, you said to him. What's the goal of each session on the bike?
Yeah.
And so clearly you're obsessed with target, you're obsessed with goal. How did you learn to be so goal driven? Were you always like that? Was that something that was learned in the military?
I think that was a military thing. In the military, we always have a mission, have an
Okay.
objective. And that, that it starts off with that. Everything what is the goal? What is the objective? What is the mission? And then you work back from that. How are we going to achieve that mission? What is the outcome that we want as well? And so that's what I wanted. So when he's like, oh, go on the bike and cycle, so he'd say, can you go on the bike and cycle for like 2 hours?
Right.
I'm like, yeah, that's fine, but what's my objective?
And he's like, what are you talking about?
And I said, well, give me a target. Is that 40 miles in 2 hours? Is that keeping it at a certain heart rate? I need something to gauge, because and that's the thing, you could just go and just cycle and not put any effort in. I need to have those numbers. But it's interesting enough, I needed that in the training, but I didn't need it when I was on the challenge. He would say to me, I would do like 100 miles each week, and I
Mhm.
would do the same route. And he's like, Dean, why are you doing the same route? And I said, well, I know that road every inch. I know where the coffee shop is. And what it is I can gauge, from other weeks. But I knew that when I was on the bike ride, every day was going to be a different day. I was going to see some amazing things.
Right.
But it's really interesting actually, because when I then did the bike ride, I uploaded all my data for Strava. I wasn't a cyclist, the cycling community are quite geeky. They love data. They're fixated on numbers and the cadence and the power output and your heart rate and things like that. And so I would put it all out there. But I remember one day I was in, I think it was Peru actually. This gentleman messaged me and he said, "How are you feeling today?" I said, "Fine." He said, "Your heart rate yesterday was through the roof." I was like, "Oh, really?" And I looked at it on Strava and it was extremely high. But there could be any contributing factor to that. It could be altitude, lack of sleep, diet, all
Right.
these things. And so for me, I never used to get fixated on data. So cyclists, I don't know if you cycle, do you, Lawrence, or not? Do you do any
No,
cycling? No.
no.
So for example, if I was to cycle from my house today, I would do a loop, I'd come back. So at some point
Okay.
I'm going to get a headwind, some point I'm going to get a tailwind.
Right.
Do that exact route tomorrow, exactly the same time. I'm going to get different data. And because the weather's going to be slightly different. I don't know how I slept last night. I don't know how I ate and things like that. But cyclists, they look at that data. Oh my God, I'm worse than where I was. So for me, I never used to get fixated on the data. I would on my Garmin computer on my bike, I would the time of the day, speed, and the distance, and that was it. Everything else I took off there, and I just went on how I felt.
Mm.
If I felt good, I would carry on. I wouldn't be dictated by the numbers. What I mean? And that's how I train. Yeah. So for me, I still had my objective for the day. I got to get to this point. So I had my
Right.
objective and I just let everything else just go with the flow.
Powerful, powerful. There's a point where you say, so this is something I want to explore because I think it could help a lot of people. At some point, you started to take your training to a whole nother level. You went to Dubai for the desert. You go to Thailand for the humidity. You go to an altitude training center to bike in a thin air environment, and ended up sleeping in like an altitude simulator or an altitude tent for the last couple of months prior to the record attempt. And, I think it was when people were seeing you um, in the altitude center, they found out you were in special forces. You said, and you'd gotten this question before, I think, but you said that people would ask you, like, oh, how do you deal with fear? How do you cope with fear? How do you overcome fear?
Yeah.
And you said that, you know, a lot of fear stems from the unknown, and you said there I was proving to myself that I could do something and it wouldn't break me. And you
Yeah.
said I was taking the fear of the unknown away and replacing it, I love this, with
Mm.
the confidence that came from conquering.
Yeah.
I had taken the what this is, I mean, this could have been the name of your book. You said I had taken the what ifs that could mean failure and turned them into what's possible.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people are crippled by fear.
Hmm.
So can you elaborate on this idea of how you overcome fear and panic and uncertainty? What does that mean? The,
Yeah.
confidence that comes from conquering. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think as a phrase I used to use for my students on the commando course as well, and it's easy when you're looking back and you've done it yourself. I remember on the endurance course, they have to go through the water tunnel, and these young 17, 18-year-olds are just scared. Or we do the simulator in the helicopter who goes in the water and turns and it's all blacked out, and I always say anticipation is worse than participation, is that people think about it too much before they do it. Your mind's playing tricks you there. Because then when you actually do it, you then look back and realize actually it wasn't that bad. That wasn't actually that bad.
Hmm.
And and again, I mentioned it before, you can't be experienced without experiences. Take something from everything you've done in life. I don't like the word failure either. I think the word failure scares a lot of people. They
Hmm.
don't like to fail. So I say I don't call it failure, I call it an experience.
Okay.
And as long as you've learned from that experience and you haven't repeated that experience and do the same thing later on, then you're progressing. So with the bike ride, I was very fortunate in the military to have served in the jungle, the Arctic, the desert. I've operated in those environments, but I hadn't done it on a bike. I
Right.
hadn't cycled in the jungle, in the humidity. I hadn't cycled in the desert, and I hadn't cycled at altitude or in the Arctic. And bearing in mind for your listeners, I had everything from plus 47 degrees centigrade, which is 120 plus Fahrenheit, to minus 18 in the snow, and everything in between.
Oh,
And so for me, I didn't want to take a gamble. That was the fear I had. I was fine cycling in normal weather.
hmm.
I didn't want to take a gamble, a challenge, and find out actually I'm not that good at cycling in the heat, or I'm not that good at cycling at altitude or whatever. So I simulated those scenarios, and I went out to Dubai, did 2 weeks heat training. I went out to Thailand. We couldn't cycle on the road because it was very dangerous, but did 2 weeks of CrossFit training, the humidity, seeing how the body copes in those environments. And then altitude, if the biggest climb, there's a famous ride called the Tour de France, and the biggest climb is about 21 to 23 kilometers. The biggest climb I was doing was 67 kilometers from sea level to 4,500 meters. So again, I'd worked at altitude, I worked at depth under the water, but I hadn't done it on a bike. And so probably one of the hardest bike rides I've done today was a static bike ride for 10 hours in the altitude center, just to basically ease my mind that yes, you can ride at altitude, yes, you can ride in heat, and yes, you can ride in the humidity as well. And so that eliminates the fear, because you're putting yourself not in the exact scenario, but similar scenarios as well. So when it came to the day of the race, I knew how my body reacted and what I had to do.
Yeah, I mean I think that's great advice for people who are, avoiding doing something pretty incredible. You know,
Yeah.
I, I think
And there's
it's
something about fear in the special forces. People say, and anyone says they're fearless, talking rubbish. Everyone has fear. It's what you do with that fear. I talk about earlier, I take some of that negative energy, whether it's nervousness or fear, and put it into positive energy. But where fear gets eliminated is through, we can't replicate every scenario that we're going to go into, but we've done the training, and we train and we train and we train and train. And so when you're comfortable, it's all becomes second nature what we do, the drills and skills. The fear's there, but you're confident in your ability. And you have to have an element of not courage, but belief that you will succeed that mission. Because I talk about how positivity is contagious, but so is fear. Fear is contagious as
right.
well. And so you as a leader in the team, or whether I was on that bike ride and I had the support team, if I had any doubt or fear, then that would, they would believe that as well. But if they just see the confidence in you, and not confidence in an arrogance or an ego, just confidence, then they're going to follow you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you turn, like you said, what ifs into what's possible.
Yeah.
That's got to be the title of your next book. But I want to talk about, you mentioned that redirect, again, you talked about redirecting negativity. In fact, you said that for every one person who believed that you could break the record, there had been a handful who said it couldn't be done by a novice or by someone with your build or by going south to north. The list of negativity that was out there, there was a fair bit of it. And you said, this probably sounds crazy. This is a quote from you. You said, it probably sounds crazy, but if everyone had been totally sure I would smash this record, it would have made things harder for me, because during the hardest days, I needed to get angry to keep going. And the doubters and the naysayers kept my feet cranking those pedals.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting because I have, when we did the sponsorship marketing team did the SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The only weakness came out as my arrogance towards the cycling community, which I took as a strength. And actually, in fairness, no one really in the cycling community said that. It's probably how it could be perceived. I get it for the likes of Mark Beaumont and these guys that do these as a living. This 40-year-old guy who's only ever cycled 20 mile, who's 200 pounds in weight, thinks he's going to be, doing this. So I had that. But yeah, you're taking that negative energy and turning it into positive. It's like, the best no point in me going on social media, because some people, when I was doing my training, is like, well, this is how Mark trains. Why don't you do that? I said, well, I'm not Mark. This is how I'm going to train. I know my body. I started training at 40 and broke the world record at 41. I didn't know anything about nutrition. People were talking about these gels and things like that. I was like, no, I will have a full English breakfast. I will do what my body is used to and what gives me energy, because that's what works for me. We're all unique and different. But as I mentioned early on, there's no point in me arguing with those people. The best course of action was action itself. So I didn't respond to that. And I did. I looked like a 10-pound sausage squeezed into a 5-pound suit on day one. And, I was still had the muscles, I still had the fatigue. But, Ken, these cycling community, they would have you as thin as your pen at
Right.
2-3% body fat, for these events. They do it on the Tour de France, but their immune systems are low. And so for me, there was an element of, I understand the cycling world, I understand what I need to achieve, but
Mhm.
I also look at what I've done in the past. 6 months special forces selection. You don't start day one 100% fit and 2 to 3% body fat, because you will
Right.
burn out by week 2 or 3. This
Absolutely.
was a polar expedition in regards nutrition. I was losing weight from the day that I started to the day that I finished. So I needed to have that weight on me. So I always say start 75, 80% fit, carry that extra weight. It's going to be hard at the beginning, but then you're going to shed that and then you're going to move. So that was the mindset I took into that. It wasn't a cycling mindset. It was something I picked up from my time before. But yeah, as you said, whereas people are doubting, you're just ticking off, you're breaking, we'll took 10 days off the South America, we'll record. And everyone actually said to me, that's great. You can relax now. The pressure's off. And I said, it's not. It's because that's not the one I wanted. That's still not the Pan American Highway. This is
Right.
just a kickoff feature. This puts me in a good position going forward. But just because I got the world record doesn't mean that cycling's easy the next day. It's still hard.
That's right. So actually, so that's the thing. So on your trek, and by the way, you've been very generous with your time. I got a couple more questions for you.
No worries.
But so as you're on your trek and you get to the United States,
Yeah.
right? Like you said, you'd already broken one record, which
Yeah.
was the fastest man to cycle the length of South America. 48 days he did it. But this is the crazy thing. Like you said, oh, you can relax now. You could, you went through the hardest part,
Yeah.
right? But you then started piling up more challenges
Yeah.
onto your plate because although you were 14 days ahead of schedule when you made it to the USA, and that all of a sudden Alana calls you to tell you that you've been invited to Prince Harry's wedding,
Mm.
and that to make it to the affair,
Yeah.
you'd have to complete the trek in 102 days
Yeah.
instead of 110 days. So, I mean,
I said
obviously,
117 because that was the original one.
right,
Yeah.
right, the
Yeah.
117, that
Yeah.
was the fudge part. Yeah, right, right, right. So, and obviously you and Alana couldn't turn down the chance to attend a royal wedding. So you turned what could have been an easy finish
Yeah.
into a whole new mountain to climb. And by the way, if that weren't enough, soon after that, you found out that another cyclist, a well-known record breaker, was making all sorts of noise that he was aiming to become the first man to cycle to Pan Am in under 100 days.
Yeah.
So, and you said, although that bothered the heck out of you, what was really gnawing at you was the question of whether or not you were giving this challenge everything you
Yeah.
had.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
What, what,
I got into, as you touched on there, I got into North America on day 70 and I was 14 days ahead. And I'm like, perfect. I can,
right.
because having spoken to the previous record holders, I remember that I said to them, all their issues were in South and Central America.
That's right.
From now on, I don't know what it was coming into the US. A huge sense of relief. It was the fact that hopefully all our issues are behind us. The culinary options are a lot better. I've more, people speak our language. You're having to get people to sign books and witness books and things like that. When you're doing that through Latin America, you're having to explain to people. People got it. And yeah, Alana rang me and said, be invited to Harry's wedding. I said, perfect. She goes, no, you don't understand. You need to be told by day 102. So going into that phone call, I was 14 days ahead. 10 minutes later, I'm now a day behind.
Oh,
So although it was great to be invited, there was some explicits as I was cycling off. But the luxury I had in North America that I didn't have in South America and Central America is we had to be off the road at night there. It's not safe in the evenings on the roads there.
okay.
In America, it was fine. We could cycle at night. And so I had that as added to my toolbox.
Okay.
But I got to Lubbock, and the next day we had 60-mile-an-hour winds and mini tornadoes. So we're grounded now for another 24 hours. So I was now like 2 days behind. There's an app on your phone called Windy TV. It gives you the strength and directions of the winds, forecast every hour for the next 2 weeks. And it's about 95% accurate. So I just put pen to paper. I just played chess with Mother Nature. And I had to cycle 340 miles in the next 36 hours to miss the next weather window.
Okay.
I got to Cheyenne in Wyoming, and I picked up a great tailwind and did 270 miles in 11 hours. And so, it was great. I had 17 days planned for North America. I cycled in 11 and a half days. So I gained that time that I needed to get into the wedding. And as you touched on, I was in a town called Whitehorse, a week outside of Prudhoe Bay. And then, yeah, people show me about this guy, Michael Strasser, sponsored by Red Bull, 3 other world records. And so for me, was I comfortable in just continuing at the pace? Because I knew we were smashing the world record. I was back in time for the wedding. Or do I see how far I can push it? What is it? What is my limits? And so, yeah, I cycle for 22 hours in the last 30 hours in minus 18 in the Arctic Circle to come in the 99 days, 12 hours and 56 minutes. And so for me, looking back, if I'd known about the wedding, if I'd known about Michael from day one, we did it in 99 days. I had 5 days off free due to weather and 2 logistics. Would I have taken them days off, or would I just carried on pushing? Would I push myself too hard that I didn't give me that rest that I needed? So for me, when the information came to me, thankfully I was in a position that I could act. Yes, the start point and objective hadn't changed. It was just the timelines, so that hadn't changed. It just, I had to just change the way that I cycle. But I think that special forces mentality helped me in the fact that, we do it when we go on operations. Sometimes we get dropped into places and we don't know what the infrastructure is like or what the position is like. And we just have to react to situation changes on the ground. And that's what I did. I had a plan, but as the situation came in, I just had to react to those changes and just keep going.
And just to put some context to this, because I mean, that last Dalton Highway, really, that last 24 hours of this thing was so painful, so much torture to get to your record. It's just unbelievable. But the point is, you made it, right? But like, you were getting hammered, man. You were getting hammered. You constantly stop start with the with the changing of the tires.
Yeah.
Then there was the construction on the road. They wouldn't let you go through, so you had to wait, and that meant now you had to go even faster. And it was the snow was hammering you. It was black ice. You were hallucinating. It was like insane. So here's the quote to give context to everybody what the last stretch to get to the finish line was. You said athletes talk a lot about visualization and how they had imagined their final moment of victory again and again. I'd done the same. But as I drew close to the finish line, my moment was not anything like I'd imagined. There was no ride under the Champs-Élysées with me leaning back in the seat with my hands in the air. I clung onto my handlebars for dear life, hitting one patch of black ice after another. My face was covered in frozen snot. My muscles were shaking from fatigue and cold, and every blast of Arctic wind cut me to the bone. But I made it. I skidded to the finish line, dropped my bike, and pulled my wife and kids into a hug. I was so exhausted that I was probably talking gibberish. So this scene, Dean, it brings me back to something your wife Alana said when people had asked her, "What do you think Dean will do if he fails?" And her answer was, oh yeah, like, what if Dean doesn't make it? What's the plan? And Alana's answer to them was, he won't fail. He'll make it, or he's going to die trying.
Yeah.
So it's not just you who believes in you. Alana believes in you to the point where she's like, no, you don't understand. This guy will die before he, doesn't make this happen. So this is really my final question. Why is it so important for you to be the literal embodiment of the term relentless?
I don't know. There's obviously something inside me that wants to, I always want to see what the realms of possible are. But one thing, we're talking about me, and it's interesting to say about Alana's mindset there is going back again slightly in the special forces, for every special forces operator to jump out a plane, dive on, whatever they're doing, takes 7 other people you don't see. It's part of that team behind you. And
Hmm.
so it's surrounding you with the right team. And that's what I'm doing. I think if I have the right team around me, I do say nothing is impossible. It just hasn't been done yet. And so, but yeah, there's an element of personal drive and things like that. But I know that I can't do this forever. I'm 47 years old.
Okay.
And so it's like, you know, I just don't, if I just feel if I'm not giving my 110%, then, I always say the unrelenting pursuit of excellence, is great because it's not just in sport or in the military, whether you're a carpenter or in finance. As
Hmm.
long as you know that you're giving yourself 110%, 100% that day, then no one can ask anything more of you. My 100% might be different from someone else's
Right.
100%, and I'm not taking, and that's why I say, don't compare yourself. That's why I never compare myself to other people. And I say people don't compare yourselves to me. Someone doing a 5K run for them or training for a 5K run is their 100%. And so they're giving as much as what I'm giving on this. It's just that my bar is probably slightly higher than theirs, and it's the bar that I've set myself. And that's the problem I have, not a problem at all, but the problem I have moving forward is the bar is set so high. But another issue, like Ilana says as well, is that, people, because your background and because what you've achieved, people, because you're in the special forces, are like, oh, we can do that. He's in the special forces. Alana gets upset because I know 99.99% of special forces who can't cycle 14,000 miles in that. And
Right.
so really it's about achieving those expectations of people as well. And so for me, the bar is always set high, but again, it gives me that fire in the belly.
Yeah. It really does speak to an ethos, because a lot of the times, oh, this is the unrelenting pursuit of excellence, the British Special Forces ethos part of it, right? Um, and you'll hear these principles that elite groups have, that elite individuals have. You'll hear these maxims, you'll hear these axioms, you'll hear these values, but until you actually meet someone that does what you do, it's all just words. It's all just like great ideas you read in a book.
Yeah.
Um, but to have someone like you who gets out there and proves it and lives it, so much so, like I said, that the other people that know you are willing to say, no, you don't say he's never going to fail. He will die before he fails. So, it's a character, it's become a character trait of yours
Yeah.
that other people, it's your calling card, that other people can actually rely on the soundness, the rock solid foundation of that ethos. So, you know, I think that as many people as can, if they truly want to understand what it takes, what the mindset is,
Yeah.
what the ideals are of doing and achieving big things, they got to read your book.
Yeah.
But the thing I love about it is that anyone who walks away reading your book, they're going to be able to walk away saying, you know what? If he was able to do this, actually, I can do something pretty wild because he wasn't a cyclist and he did the impossible. So
That was the aim of the book, was to is that it's never too late to start a sport, but also
mhm.
be good at a sport as well. It doesn't matter when you come into something at whatever age. And yeah, something you touched on there. I do a lot of guest speaking around the world, and you get those people who regurgitate those comments of leadership and things like that. Whereas
That's right.
which is great, it's always good to learn. Whereas for me, I just share my story and where I've applied that in my life, and my next evolution that I'm going into now is I'm still very much immersed in that security stuff, like Israel and stuff like that. But that doesn't happen all the time. For me, I want to sort of share the knowledge that I've experienced and give that to people. So yeah, I'm now starting my own coaching practice as well too.
Phenomenal.
So, but my strategy now though is to change people how they see me, because they see me as the world record holder. They see me as the security guy. And for me, it's like, I just want to, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, I want to be able to at least have shared my knowledge and what, I wish someone had told me what stone to step on and what not to step on going through life. And so
Right.
that's where I am at the moment because yeah, I think there's a lot of people out there in the leadership space, and hopefully for me that I've done it in three areas: the military, the corporate, and a sport I've never done before, and just share that mindset. Hopefully,
A triple threat. You're triple threat.
Triple-
Dean, thank you so much. Where can our audience learn more about you?
yeah, I have a website, deanstott.com. I am on Instagram and Facebook. Yeah, just find me on there, and oh, you may see me popping up somewhere else.
Phenomenal, phenomenal. That's I think if you really want to learn, if you really want to model, if you really want to embody the magic ingredient that helps people achieve incomprehensible things, it really does come down to that word. That's the foundation of your book, and that is relentless. Dean Stott, you are relentless. Thank you so much for doing the show.
Thank you.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you for your service, and it's been an honor and a privilege.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. I've had a great time.
Awesome.